Hello everyone, welcome to Thursday, and welcome to another edition of the PixelMill Webinar Series, and today's offering of Understanding Compliance and Records Management in Office 365. As always, my name is Michael Wells. I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at PixelMill. I want to start off by saying I apologize for missing last month's session. I got stuck in jury duty. I can tell you right now I would have much rather been here with you all than being in there. So pardon me for missing last week. I'm very happy to be back, and I'm very excited for today's session. A little bit about PixelMill. If you've never joined our webinar series before, welcome. We're happy to have you for the first time. A little bit about us. We specialize in building customized communication and collaboration portals and sites utilizing Office 365, SharePoint, SharePoint Online, and Azure, with our main goal of really developing solutions that are in line with unique company cultures. So, or as we like to call it, SharePoint your way. There's a quick little version. I can definitely tell you more about it another time, but let's get to the main point, all right? Again, if this is your first time, welcome. If you're coming back to our webinar series, welcome back. We're happy to have you again, of course. Thank you for coming back. If you have any questions or comments at any time during this session, there is a questions and chat. There are separate questions and chat tabs attached to this. Throw those questions out there, throw those comments out there. I'll be keeping track during the session, and I will throw them out throw those questions out to our speaker as soon as I'm able to. If we don't get to those questions right away, we do leave about 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A. So bring those questions on. Our speaker loves to answer questions, so don't hold back. Ask whatever you want. Without further ado, I'll stop talking. Let me introduce you to our speaker today. She is coming all the way up from Seattle, coming in today to give this session. Please welcome everyone, Erica Toelle. Take it away.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining today. As Michael mentioned, I'm Erica Toelle. I work at RecordPoint, which is the records management add-in for SharePoint and Office 365. Today we'll be talking about how compliance and records management works natively out of the box in Office 365, so you can fully understand how to have a robust records management solution and remain compliant while using Office 365. So with that, let's kind of just dive right in. So some of you on the call may be familiar with records management. Some of you, it may be kind of new or you're not quite sure of the details. But really, it's something that we've been having to do for years and years and years. Even back before computers existed, we needed to keep paper records in boxes, on shelves, and whatnot. And then the problem of how to do this in a scalable way has just become more complicated as electronic records have come in. So, it's always the problem's been, how do you maintain being compliant with your content? How do you reduce the risk caused by that content? And then also balance that with ease of use for the end user. So typically in a lot of records management systems, you're asking end users to either tag things with metadata or put them in a certain location. So records management and retention policies can all be applied automatically. But in all of those scenarios, the end user is the one who's having to actually do records management with the files. And that actually doesn't work quite well. I'm sure we've all tried to get end users to fill out metadata. Unless it's required, it just doesn't happen. So that's a business problem we haven't really solved yet. And we're gonna look today at how we might automate this a little better. And then the cloud has just made this harder. Even though Office 365 is pretty widely adopted at this point in most organizations, or they're at least using SharePoint, we also have other silos of information in our organization. So that might be Box, if people are trying to use that to get around any external collaboration issues. It might still be file shares. You might have a legacy ECM system, something like Documentum or Open Text Content Manager. There's lots of different data silos. So this is the problem we're currently facing today, is how do we remain compliant while offering an intuitive, easy experience for our users, and then crossing these data silos. So with that in mind, that's part of the business problem. The second is we have to comply with standards. So if you work in a highly regulated or government organization, you have requirements for how you must keep your data, do record keeping. For financial services, for example, for SOX compliance, You need to keep certain financial documents for a certain number of years, depending on what it is, so that we don't have another in-run situation where people are shredding the evidence and we don't really know what happened. I think we're all familiar with HIPAA for healthcare. That's a lot of rules around how patient information needs to be protected and how it can be used and shared. And then one of the things you have to be able to do is pull up that patient's information if requested. So again, how do we make sure information is properly categorized so we can do that? Something that pretty much all these standards have in common is the need to be able to categorize content into various buckets, a contract, a patient health record, etc. We need to be able to identify where that is, no matter what data silo it's sitting in. And then we need to be able to retain the content for a certain number of years, meaning that we're making sure it isn't going to be deleted prematurely. And we need to be able to prove to an auditor that we're doing that. And then the third requirement is when that retention period is over, we need to be able to delete the content and do so in what they call a defensible manner, meaning you proved that it was deleted according to the policy. Some policies require approval before it's deleted, for example. So you need to be able to retain the audit trail of the document, sometimes the metadata for the document, and then the information about who approved it to be deleted. And then again, have that ready for an auditor. Then also, if you are not in a highly regulated or government organization, you still have some needs around that, right? You want to keep information around for its useful life. You want to delete it once it's become redundant, obsolete, or trivial, what we call rot data. And so these types of requirements have a lot in common, even though some are more strict than others. So even if you aren't highly regulated or in a government organization, this is still hopefully useful for you to keep your data kind of clean and tidy and useful in your Office 365 environment. So how do we accomplish these requirements in Office 365? Well, there's a feature set called Advanced Data Governance, which is the features that, that Microsoft has packaged up to accomplish these goals. So within the ADG feature set, we have three things. Number one is labeling, and labels basically classify the information, put it in a category. It's kind of like metadata in a way. Number two is retention policies. So this is how you either make sure data is kept or make sure it is deleted. And then the third one is supervision, which is creating policies around, let's say, if you want to know if somebody is emailing to a competitor's email address, or you want to monitor someone's Skype for business communications, that's what supervision would do. For today's purpose, though, where we're really focused on the more records management features, we're going to talk about labeling and retention. So it's actually a little confusing. It took me several hours of perusing the documents and running tests to really get this figured out. But labels and retention policies kind of have some similarities. So for example, a label can have retention associated with it, but it's different than what ADG considers a retention policy. And we're going to deep dive into each of these, but I just wanted to kind of level set up front that you're not crazy, they are kind of similar. If you want to do event-based retention, for example, where you want to say when a project's end date, we want to keep our documents for 3 years after the project's over. The project end date is the event that triggers the 3-year retention policy. You can only do that actually with a label, not with our actual retention policy. And then if you're looking at using one set of labels and retention policies to manage all of your Office 365 content, which is kind of the point of this, then if you want to manage SharePoint, OneDrive, Office 365 groups, or exchange emails, you can do that with labels or retention policies. But if you want to manage Microsoft Teams chats and conversations, Skype for Business, or Exchange public folders, that can only be done with a retention policy. And then the rest of these will go into detail in the future. But basically, you're not crazy. They are pretty similar. So let's look at the differences in detail. Oh, I do want to mention really quick, everything that we're talking about today, if you actually want to do this in your Office 365 environment, you would go to the Office 365 Tenant Administration area and then click on the Security and Compliance Center, which is down at the bottom in the Admin Centers area. You can also assign permissions to people to only allow them to access the Security and Compliance Center. Say if you have a records manager, somebody in legal, or a compliance officer that wants to be able to use these features, but you don't want to give them access to everything in Office 365, you can do that. So now let's start diving into labels and retention policies. So starting with labels. So at a high level, labels are able to classify documents. Like you might have a label that says this document is confidential versus public. You might use a label to say this contains a social security number, or if you're going the records management direction, you might label something with a category from your file plan, such as contract. Once the label has been used to classify the document, the label container, if you will, brings along a couple pieces of functionality that could be useful, namely retention. So you could use a label to delete content automatically. So let's say you're just completely fed up with everyone wanting to keep everything forever. You could have a label that says, for everything in my organization, delete it if it's 7 years old, or if it's older than 7 years. You could do that. You could also use it to retain content for a period of time. So your classic records management example, where you want to keep all your contracts for 7 years. You could also delete the content once the retention period is over. So we've kept our contract for 7 years. We don't want it sitting around anymore because it creates a liability in case of a need for litigation and e-discovery. Let's delete it. You can also trigger a simple disposition review, meaning once it's reached the end of its retention period, I want you to email either a specific user or an Office 365 security group and have them approve that yes, this can be deleted before it actually is deleted. You could also just choose to do nothing. And then you can trigger the start of the retention period based on when the content was created, when it was last modified, or when the label was applied. And then you could also trigger it off of an event, but we'll have a detailed slide about that a little later. You can also use a label to classify something as a record. Some people call this finalization. It's where you're actually locking the file down from being edited so that people can't change it anymore. So you can use a label to do that if you would like.
Erica, we have our first question.
Excellent.
Oh, I lied. It's a two-part question, so kind of two questions. This is from our friend Jose. Thank you, Jose, for sending your questions in. What is the difference regarding this with respect to the Record Center in SharePoint? It has a retention policy, information policy, question mark, and then also in SharePoint, Record Center declared records. Is this redundant? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah,
Erica?
that's a great question. Actually, I need to put a slide in this, I think, about this. So you're completely right. SharePoint has native records management functionality. It's pretty much been unchanged since the SharePoint 2010 days, and it is present in SharePoint Online. So you can use that if you would like. If for those of you that are unfamiliar, you basically can submit documents to what's called a record center so that they're locked from editing and they're kind of more in an archive location. They're not like out there in the world for people to change. And you can use content types and metadata to kind of help categorize and label those records so that the correct retention policy is applied in the Record Center. In the official Microsoft TechNet documentation for Office 365, they actually recommend not using that. They haven't said anything about that functionality going away or not being there, but they are definitely pushing the idea of one set of retention policies and labels that will apply to all Office 365 content, not just SharePoint content, if that makes sense.
Groovy, thank you.
Yeah. Did you say there's a second part to the question?
No, that was kind of all, I kind of ran it all together.
Okay.
So you're good.
Yeah, and as we go through this, please just ask your questions. We'll pause quite frequently to see if there's anything people want to ask. So continuing on with labels, if you actually want to create a label, you would first actually create it using the screen that we saw in the last slide. And then once it's created, you create what's called a label policy that determines where, in what locations you can see the label and use it. For example, you might create a label that you only would publish to SharePoint. Or you might create a label that you would only publish to Exchange for use in emails. And you can, well, we'll get into detail about this. But just the idea that you create it and then you deploy it. So they're kind of two separate steps. So these are the locations where you can deploy your label. So you could have a label that applies everywhere, all locations. But all locations means SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Office 365 groups, and Exchange email. The other thing you can do is deploy a label, and you can include or exclude certain criteria. So for example, we could have a label that we are going to only deploy to 50 finance sites. Or we could have a label that we're only going to deploy to the CXOs, the executive teams, OneDrive for businesses, because we need to scrutinize their data much more carefully, etc. And so these are the limits. You can do up to 100 sites, either included or not included in the policy, 1,000 individual accounts, 100 groups, or 1,000 email recipients. So just the idea that you're able to do that. So remember at the beginning we were talking about the business problem of records management, and one of the problems we have is that we've been asking end users to be records managers. We've been asking them to apply metadata or put things in a certain location so that they're essentially deciding this is a contract and it should be kept and classified as a contract. That hasn't worked super well just because end users are not compliance experts, and we could give them all the training in the world and they don't care. So it's actually better if we can find a way to automatically classify data without end user involvement. So Office 365 provides 3 ways that you're able to do that. So you can automatically apply a policy based on a sensitive information type. You can apply it based on the results of a search query, or you could auto apply it based on a document library location. So if somebody does put a document in the document library, it is automatically labeled. So let's look into those with more detail. So automatically applying labels based on sensitive information types. This is driven by what's called the data loss prevention functionality. This is functionality that's available in Office 365 that essentially is looking for sensitive information. Sensitive information might be a social security number, a financial bank account number. They have templates that are available based on certain countries or regions. And you can see there it's broken out in financial data, medical and health data, personal privacy, or you could also write your own custom DLP policy. Essentially what these policies do is they look for a matching pattern of information. So social security number for the United States would be 3 numbers, a dash, 4, oh wait, no, sorry. 3 numbers, yeah, a dash, 2 numbers, and then 4 numbers. I had to like think of my social security number in my head really quick. So you're able to look for those patterns, and if it finds the pattern, you can apply a label so that people are aware that you know, this is a document containing sensitive information and you should proceed accordingly. You could also, of course, apply a specific retention policy based on that sensitive information pattern. The next way to automatically apply a label is based on a search query. So if you you would write the query just like you would any standard search query in Google or in SharePoint, where you can use operators like and, or, not. But it needs to be a word or a phrase. One of the things that they've said for a while now is coming soon is the ability to query the Office 365 search index based on properties. So wouldn't it be great if you have your SharePoint records management system that you invested in when you were on premises, and you've now migrated it to Office 365. You like the idea of using these labels and retention policies that can apply to all Office 365 content, but you still want to honor the investment in content types and all that structure and information architecture that you invested in. You, in the future, hopefully this fall or soon, they haven't told us a date yet, hopefully you'll be able to search based on the property content type. If it is this content type, then apply this label. So that's kind of where I'm hoping this goes, and they've hinted at it, but that would be really the power of these automatic labels. As it is today, it's difficult to write a query that you know for sure it's going to label things correctly, just because, well, you need to be more specific for it's useful. So pros and cons there. Keep your eye on this space. The last thing you could do is automatically apply a label based on a location. So this would be a document library where you actually just go into the document library settings. There's a link that says apply a label to items in this library, and then you have a drop-down menu of all the labels that have been deployed to that document library location. And then if you label, say, a document set or a folder, it would inherit the default label. There unfortunately isn't a way to automatically turn this on using PowerShell or something similar. You do need to manually go to each library in order to do that. And then just a couple caveats. If you are using the labels and you move an item from one library to another library, it will remove the label, which, depending again how strict your records management needs are, you may or may not be comfortable with that. So any questions before we move on? I haven't seen the red hand raised, so.
There's nothing in the queue right now, so I think you're good to move on.
All right. So a couple caveats to the automatic application of labels in Office 365. It won't automatically apply a label if that checkbox has designated it as a record. I mean, on the surface, this makes sense, right? When you label something and it's the record label, it's going to lock down all those items so they can't be edited. That would kind of suck if you wrote your search query wrong and you locked down someone's important files from being edited. So that's why they're not going to have you automatically apply those types of labels. So if you do want to declare things officially as a record and finalize them, you'll need to do that manually. And then just as an aside, if you are, for SharePoint content specifically, anyone that's in the members group or the contribute permission level for classic sites, they're allowed to apply a record label to content, but then only the site collection administrator can remove it. So if a site member accidentally labels it as a record, it will be locked down until that site collection admin can change it. The other thing is the automatic application rules won't label something if that piece of content has had a label that has been manually applied by a user. Again, this makes sense because if the end user has gone to trouble to manually select the piece of metadata, it probably means that there was a reason and that they were probably right. So because it is more granularly, more specifically applied, then that's why it won't override it with the automatic application. And then if you're a records manager, you're probably thinking, if I'm using these automatic rules, then there's going to be a conflict at some point where, so you can only have one label at a time on a piece of content. So if you have a document that meets the criteria for two different labels, how does it decide which label is more important? It would be really great if you were able to set a priority or some kind of hierarchy on the labels, but not yet. We cannot do that. So they've decided that whichever label was created first in that Security and Compliance Center, that will be the one that's applied. That one's kind of heavy because usually when you're deploying something, you might create a couple test labels, see how it works, not deploy it anywhere, and those are the oldest labels. Or you might be, as you plan your deployment, you have to kind of think about the order in which you're actually creating the labels. You need to plan out all your labels and then the importance of them so you can make sure that you're creating these labels in the correct order. So just be cognizant of that, whether you're using labels for general categories or for records management. So remember I mentioned event-based retention earlier in the presentation. So event-based retention is a new feature of Office 365. They just released it, I think, at the end of April, because it was before SharePoint conference. And it is the ability to create a label, and you would say create a label called employment record. You would then have an event type that is an employee is leaving. You would publish the label and have it available. And then you would want to make sure that each piece of content related to that employee's record has a unique identifier. So this is, we call it an event ID, but it's just a unique number. It might be the employee ID number. So then when that employee leaves, you would go into the Security and Compliance Center. You would create an instance of the event. Jane Doe left the company, and you would put in her employee ID number, and everything associated with that employee ID would be triggered off the date of Jane Doe leaving. So let's say you wanted to keep her stuff for 3 years. That's how you identify what content is included in that scope, and then set the retention schedule based on that event. They've also said they're going to be releasing some APIs so that we can maybe automatically create these events and trigger them, maybe from external systems, like if you have an HR system, but that isn't available in the current preview. So the other thing to keep in mind is if you're going to use these automatic labels, it does take 7 days for the automatic application of the label to occur. This is because all of the records management timer jobs in Office 365 run on a 7-day period. If you are using SharePoint records management, they're also on a 7-day timer job. Things like, is the retention period up? It actually only checks every 7 days to see if that's true. So let's say that you create a new label, you want it to be automatically applied. So within 1 day, the label will be synced to all the locations, and people could use it for manually labeling things if you would like. But then it will take up to 7 days before all of the content is correctly labeled. Now, depending on when your timer job runs, it could be 1 day, but it could be up to 7. This is really important to know because if you're running a pilot where you're creating a bunch of test cases, you have to set up your tests and then wait 7 days to see sometimes if they worked correctly. So just be sure to put that into your project plan, that 7-day duration for your tests. So this is what came from an Office 365 white paper on advanced data governance. And I think what they're really, really strong at is creating these more general classifications. So labels are really strong at identifying sensitive information and creating broad, high-level retention policies or deletion policies, where you maybe have between, I'd say, 5 and 20 labels in your organization. For most companies that are highly regulated, unless you're highly regulated or a government organization where you have more strict records management requirements, that's a really good way to use this functionality in that more general sense. But if you're older, I'll get back to that slide in a second, or if you have more strict requirements, this might not be enough to meet your needs. So for example, you know, a good use of it is, identify sensitive content, used for high-level classifications, and kind of general prevention of rot. If you are more strict, your records managers might not be happy that it takes 7 days to classify something, or that there is no hierarchy for the labels. The functionality is pretty generic. It may not be enough to meet your particular standards, or especially as you get into the more localized standards. What we've described today does require an E3 license or above, so E3, E5, or you can purchase a separate ADG SKU license. No automatic labeling for records, and then the manual application for document libraries. So, you know, just depending on your needs, this may or may not work for you. So just really quick, because I skipped this over, just keep in mind that if you are doing the automatic labeling, they can be published to end users across all the different areas. You can do a search query, again, across all 4 areas. But if you are doing that automatic application based on sensitive information types, that's only available for SharePoint and OneDrive content. For groups, because the groups files technically exist in SharePoint, the files can be managed, but just not the email conversations. So really what we're missing here is the email component. So just be aware. So we want to have, so now let's go into retention policies and a deep dive on those. So as we mentioned, there are quite a bit of similarities between the two. So let's dive into that. So this screen looks a bit familiar to the one we saw of labels before, but it is a little bit different. So same thing, you can delete content automatically, retain it for a specific period of time, delete content, do nothing, or in this case, there's no event-based retention, so you can just trigger it off of when the content was created or last modified. So the benefit of using a retention policy is that, well, first of all, you can manage Microsoft Teams content. So I've seen customers really use this when in Skype for Business, you have the ability to turn off your conversation history. And a lot of companies decide they don't want to keep their conversation history. And so now as you move to Microsoft Teams and that conversation history is now in Microsoft Teams, some people are creating a policy to automatically delete Microsoft Teams conversations after 30 days. Unfortunately, you can't have a retention policy on Teams for less than 30 days. 30 days is the minimum, but that's like a good kind of feature parity solution for people coming over from Skype for Business, as an example. So then when you do a retention policy, when you're creating one, of course, first you create the policy, configure the settings, how you want it to work, and then also same thing, you deploy the labels based on locations. So there's a lot more locations available in retention policies. So that's reason number one, that you might want to use a retention policy instead of a label if retention or deletion is your end goal. So it can do the same things as a label, but it can also manage Skype for Business conversations. It can't transcribe meetings or triggers based on audio recording, just the chat piece of it. You could also use it to manage Exchange public folders. And then, of course, Teams channel messages, and then Teams chats, which are the one-to-one chats. If you want to do a retention policy that applies to the whole organization, you can only deploy those to email and public folders, SharePoint, OneDrive, and groups. It will not apply to the Teams or the Skype areas. So just kind of, again, keep that in mind. You would need to create a specific policy just for those locations. And this is the second reason why you may want to use a retention policy instead of a label. So let's say that you have a piece of content that meets the criteria for 2 retention policies. In this case, it does go through this process to determine which retention periods should be applied. And I'll explain the specifics in just one second. So remember, with labels, the label that was created first, that's older, would be the label that's actually applied. With retention policies, it follows the principles of retention to decide which policy to follow. So I do have an in-depth blog on the RecordPoint blog about this, so if you're interested, check it out. But first of all, retention will always win over deletion. So let's say you have a retention policy that says to delete content after 3 years. And then you have a retention policy that says to keep it for 7 years. So what would actually happen is, let's say this is in a SharePoint site, the piece of content after 3 years would be removed from the SharePoint site so the end users can't see it anymore. But it would be retained for 7 years in what's called the preservation hold library. And I have a detail slide about that in just a second. As soon as one of the criteria are met on this slide, like let's say that this first one solved the conflict, it will stop and it won't go through the other criteria. But if for some reason this first one doesn't solve the conflict, then it will go to the next one, which is that the longest retention period wins. So if you had a retention period for 7 years and a retention period for 10 years, it's going to apply the 10-year one and be on the safe side. The next one is that explicit inclusion wins over implicit inclusion. So let's say that you have a retention policy that applies to the entire organization and everything in Office 365. And then you have another retention policy that's only applied to the finance SharePoint sites. Because the finance SharePoint sites policy is more explicit or more granular, that's going to be the policy that's applied over the general implicit organization-wide policy. And then finally, if none of those 3 have solved the conflict, the shortest deletion period would win at that point. So remember when I said, let's talk more about that preservation hold library? This is how the deletion works of content in SharePoint and OneDrive. So first of all, you have your content in your document library, and then it's being kept by a retention policy. If the content is modified or deleted while this retention period is in effect, which often happens, a copy of that is actually going to be kept in the preservation hold library. It's a hidden library that's accessible by site collection admins. So an end user or someone with just contribute rights wouldn't be able to see this library. If it's not modified or deleted, it won't go in that preservation hold library. But when does that happen? It's always modified. So once that retention period is up, any copies of the document that are just in the document library will be moved to the recycle bin. And then you know in SharePoint how the recycle bin works, right? You have the end user recycle bin, which is the first stage. Then you have the second recycle bin, which only can be accessed by site collection admins. And then after 93 days, that's when the content is permanently deleted. Now, if you have copies of that document in the preservation hold library, that will just be cleaned up in 7 days and permanently deleted without going through that recycle bin process. So, and once you understand how this works, I have a couple just cautions. So if you are experimenting with records management in Office 365 and you enable a retention policy that's applied to a site, maybe your test site or your sandbox site, and something goes in that preservation hold library, if you then delete the site before removing everything from the preservation hold library, it'll look like the site has been deleted. You can check with PowerShell. you can just check through the admin interface. It'll look like the site has been deleted, but it actually still exists because of the preservation hold library and because it's trying to be a good records management tool that is properly taking care of your content. Because we had a customer that wanted to then reuse the name of that site collection in a different site, and that name wasn't available until we cleaned up the preservation hold library. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is, if you are a company with more strict records management requirements, this 93 days to be deleted might not be acceptable to your records managers or your legal team. I actually had breakfast this morning with a records manager that's in town for SharePoint Fest, and he was saying how he used to work for, well, a cigarette company, and the lawyers wanted to make sure that when it was ready to when it was finally time for this to be legally deleted, that it was deleted that day. One day was too much risk for them, and we can guess why. So just kind of keep in mind your level of tolerance for that. One way around this would be to write your retention policies. So let's say you want it to be 3 years, write it for 2 years and 9 months. So it triggers at 2 years and 9 months and takes this 93 days into account. So same thing, if you're looking at how deletion works in Exchange, instead of the preservation hold library, it's called the recoverable items folder. So once it's modified or deleted by the user, probably deleted, it'll go into this recoverable items folder that your Exchange administrator can see, but your end user cannot. And then once the retention period is over, the admin can decide whether the cleanup period is 14 days or 30 days or anywhere in between. That's a setting that you can change, and then it would be permanently deleted. So kind of pros and cons of retention. So again, these features are really good if you kind of just want to prevent that redundant, obsolete, trivial content from just getting out of hand in your Office 365 environment. And if you don't have strict requirements around retention, these features are great for you. The retention policies do cover Skype for Business, Teams conversations, and Exchange, in addition to SharePoint, OneDrive, Groups, and Exchange emails. Some things that if you do have more strict requirements, you can't, it takes 93 days to delete. It can't manage SharePoint on-premises data, so if you have a hybrid environment, this won't work. And then certificate of destruction. So for people who aren't records managers, for certain regulations, you need to be able to provide a certificate of destruction proving that the content was deleted. So this will typically be almost like a stub of the document where the document itself is deleted, but you have the metadata around the document. You have the audit trail of who modified and viewed and did things to the document during its life cycle. And then you have who approved the approval or who approved the deletion of the document. So those things will be packaged up into what's called a certificate of destruction. That's what your auditors want to see when they come in, and Office 365 doesn't do that. So just a quick story. Some of you may be familiar with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data leak. I say data leak because the data wasn't actually leaked. All the end users gave permission for their data to be used. Where the issue is Facebook revoked the access of Cambridge Analytica to the user data and said, hey, according to our terms of service, you now need to delete everybody's data. Cambridge Analytica provided a fake certificate of destruction back to Facebook saying, yes, we did delete this data. So Facebook thought it was deleted. They had done their diligence. They had followed the process. But because the certificate of destruction was faked, that's why there was the big scandal. For records management companies like RecordPoint, for example, we're looking into how we can use technologies like blockchain to prove that the certificate of destruction is actually real. So just fun fact there. So I mean, that's pretty much it. I'm not sure if I went a little fast through that. I did end a little early, so sorry about that. What questions do you guys have about this functionality?
While people are thinking up some amazing questions to ask you, I'm curious actually more about, you were just talking about how you're looking into blockchain and how that could play into this. Is there more that you could talk about that a little bit?
Not really. I mean, so what blockchain is you probably think of it in terms of Bitcoin or something, but it's actually way more than that. It's a way to prove the authenticity of data. So let's say that you have something like a certificate of destruction. If you're a government agency, you might share what's called a ledger, which is the records of this certificate of destruction in a distributed way, meaning everyone in the agency has a copy of it. If one person at one agency tries to tamper with that ledger, then everyone else has a copy of the ledger, so they're going to say, no, in fact, this has been tampered with. We all agree that this is the correct ledger over here. So if you think about that in terms of records management, you could use that to prove that the audit trail of a record hasn't been tampered with. You could use it, of course, with the certificate of destruction, but you're able to really prove that chain of custody throughout the record's life, from the point it was created to when it was finally deleted. And you can prove without a doubt what happened to it, if that makes sense. We do have an article that goes into that in depth on the RecordPoint blog, so I'll go ahead and include that in the email recap from this webinar.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. I don't know if this has to do, or how much this has to do with what you've been talking about today, but there is something called records declaration, right? How does that play into all this?
Yeah, so records management is kind of going through a bit of a renaissance now. It used to be that you would have your document lifecycle, and when the document lifecycle ended, you would start your records lifecycle. So what would happen is you'd be collaborating on content, say in SharePoint, and at some point you would declare it as a record and either lock it down or finalize the document, or you would move that document over to your records management system, say Documentum, where that record would then be kept for the duration of the retention period. So that approach has some issues. Number one, users typically won't remember to declare it as a record and move it. So you have to find some way to like automate it or make it so the end users don't have to do things. And then number two, in order for it to have the correct retention period, end user would need to select metadata or a records classification as they're moving it. So what we've tried to do instead is integrate the document lifecycle and the records lifecycle to be the same thing. So there's nothing saying, no rule that says when a document's created, you can't take a look at it and say, hey, this should be classified with this category from our file plan. And it's categorized, and retention starts from the moment it's created. And people can still edit it or use it as they see fit. But if they try to delete it, the records management system would say, hey, wait, this is still under retention, and they would move it maybe from the end user interface to an archive location or your records management system or your records center in SharePoint. So unless there's some reason, according to a regulation, that you need to finalize or declare or essentially lock it from editing, you don't necessarily have to do that anymore, just with today's technology. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Long answer.
But that was great. Yeah, I'd heard of records declaration before, and I thought I'd come right to the source to get a better idea of what it is.
Yeah.
I believe there's also something. I was thinking about this while you're talking about that, and you may have touched on this a little bit. So if you're repeating, I apologize. There are in-place and out-of-place records, right?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure what my question is about that. I just know that's the thing that I was curious about and how that all works and how they're different.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So the idea of in-place records management is just what I was talking about, where the document exists in place in the collaboration system where the end user is working. So that in-place system, it could be Office 365, it could be SharePoint, it could be Box, they could be working in a file share. But the point is you're managing the record in place, meaning you're keeping it in that place while it still has a retention policy applied. In kind of the old way of doing things, the retention policy wasn't applied until you moved it from that place to the records management system. So that is kind of the opposite of in-place records management. It's much less risky, obviously, to manage the content always, so when it's in place. So when you're looking at records management systems, consider that as one of your requirements.
Excellent, excellent. That's all the questions I had.
Those were good questions. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Looks like everyone's enjoying your session so far. Not a whole lot of questions coming in. Is there anything on top, anything else you'd like to throw out about records management that is a helpful tip or a helpful trick for anybody who's maybe just getting into records management and wants to learn more?
So, I mean, it was kind of hard when I was first joined RecordPoint, like refreshing my knowledge about records management. So actually in September, we're going to be publishing a lot of blog content around the basics of records management. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe to the blog. Yeah, other than that, if kind of requirements for a modern records management system, I would recommend looking at systems that can manage the content in place. I would look at systems that can manage content, not just in Office 365, but other content systems as well. With today's technology and with all of the software having APIs where you can access the data in cloud systems, there's no reason why you need to have one records management system for your SharePoint, one records management system for your file shares, one for Box. Records management tools are available that could, with one set of policies, manage content in all those places. So you might take a look at that. And please don't make your end users do anything. It's not going to work, seriously. So have automation be one of your requirements. The technology is there. When you upload a file to SharePoint, there's about 25 properties about the document that are automatically added. So you can glean a lot of information just from the document properties to automatically classify it. So, just some things to keep in mind.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. All right. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of other questions come in, so I think we'll start wrapping it up just a little bit. Erica, where can we find you next? You're out and about. You're speaking a lot. You're always traveling the country. I can never keep up with you. Where are the next couple of places we can find you next if people want to talk to you in person or give you a high five?
Yeah. Well, tomorrow I have this same presentation at SharePoint Fest in Seattle. And then on Monday, I'll be at SP TechCon in Boston presenting on kind of a SharePoint 101 session for, hey, you've been handed a site, now what do you do for SharePoint beginners. And then on September 8th, if that's a Saturday, I'll be in actually Cambridge, UK. I don't think anyone international is probably here, but be there. And then, I don't know after that. Oh, Ignite. I'll definitely be at Ignite. Yeah.
Of course.
Stop by the booth.
Stop by the RecordPoint booth, say hi. Ignite's a really great time. If anybody's thinking about going, definitely go check it out. Where can we find you on social media, Erica?
Yeah, so definitely the @RecordPoint account, or my personal account is @Erica Toelle, so my first name and my last name together. Also, if you're interested in this at all, I highly recommend subscribing to the RecordPoint blog. We really try to make it more of an educational resource around these topics rather than a bunch of hoo-ha about RecordPoint. So if you're interested in this, please check it out. It's kind of my baby, and I really get excited when I see people reading it.
I can attest that they do have a pretty great blog. You guys should definitely check that out. All right, well, there we go. Thank you, Erica, for joining us today. What an amazing session. Thank you. This is really great stuff. Thank you to all who joined us. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit Erica up. As she said, either through RecordPoint or through her own Twitter. If you have any questions for PixelMill, you can find us at PixelMill Team on Twitter or pixelmill.com. Again, if you have any questions, throw them our way. Thank you so much again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Have a great rest of your week, I guess, really, because there's still a couple days left. And we will see you all next time. Have a great day, y'all. Thank you very much.